Hello everybody, this is a short section on what we try to do with the RSA approach when we applied it to mountain towns around the world. For us it was interesting to build up a network that was international, where we wanted to look at towns as key to sustainable development for mountain areas worldwide. For this we organized international exchanges with experts from the Andes, from the Carpathians, from the Himalaya, and tried, together with Professor Tobias Gilla and his team, to explore these regions with the same approach as in our report, to see what happens and to see whether this issue of small places in mountain areas is something that is Alpine specific or something that is an issue for areas around the globe. So I welcome Professor Tobias Gilla and afterwards also Jakob Steiner from ICIMOD, who is joining from Kathmandu.
Thank you, Mark. The ninth report on the state of the Alps shows pretty clearly that there is a key role beyond size for Alpine towns. Irene McMaster has shown us that small places matter also beyond Alpine mountains. And the question is now, does the idea of key roles beyond size apply to mountains that are not the Alps? And that was one of the questions that we discussed during the process of the RSA. But it's not a scientific approach, really, and it's not part of the process. It's just playing around with maps, with data, and I would just like you to have a look at it, but really with a disclaimer, it's very exploratory. This is a very classical geomorphological map of Europe with the Alps in the middle. It's the perimeter of the Alpine Convention. And we now insert two other maps. One is from the Hindu Kush Himalaya region with a perimeter of ICIMOD. And on the left-hand side, you see the Andes region with a perimeter of Condesan. What you see immediately, there is a large difference of size, of course. Now all the maps are on the same scale. But at the same time, we see that they cross borders. It's in all cases, it's a transnational issue. And, well, that already gives, I would say, food for thought. If you just exploratorily compare these three regions, it's interesting to see that they involve a similar number of nation-states that are involved. The Alps, 8 nation-states, Hindu Kush, Himalaya, 8, the Andes, 7. So roughly the same number of nation-states that have to come together and find solutions for maybe common challenges, that have to negotiate, to communicate, to cooperate. And in all cases, it's very different countries, of course. We as Europeans sometimes maybe think that the differences between, let's say, France and Slovenia are already large, or Switzerland and the EU member states. But of course, if we have a look at the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, I mean, with countries like Afghanistan or China, I mean, there are certainly larger political differences. But I think the general challenge of transnational communication cooperation exists in all mountain regions here. I don't want to read from this list. I mean, it's very classical geographical indicators or descriptions that show that there are, of course, differences in size, in height of the mountain summits. It's GDP per capita is very different. Population density is not that different, at least not in average, as you might have thought. But well, this is the overall picture here. The following maps or figures that I show, they are based on the one hand on the Alpine data from the RSA 9 process, and on the other hand, more or less on the OpenStreetMap data, so open source data from the internet, and we have cooperated a bit with Jakob Steiner, thanks to you, in the Himalaya region, and with Kondesan. And what you see here is on the x-axis the number of towns that we found from this exploratory data set, and on the vertical axis the elevation above sea level. And we see immediately that, yeah, in the Alpine region, so the blue ones, it's very much below 1,000 meters, only a few go higher. Interestingly, in the Andes region, the maximum of towns we have rather between 1,000 and 3,000 meters above sea level. And then you see in green the situation in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. So really from the topographic point of view, it's a different situation that we have to consider here. This is a map that we have seen in a bit different form in the report on the state of the Alps, and we have discussed this this morning already. So we differentiate alpine towns with more than 5,000 inhabitants and smaller alpine towns, and we try to apply this approach in a very exploratory way also on the other two mountain regions. You see now the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, and it's not really the same thresholds with regard to size, but I think we have good reason to say that the blue ones are the larger ones, and we have a lot of smaller ones rather in the northern or central region of the mountains, and in the very northern area it's even more rural or peripheral here. So if you think about small places matter, that might be an issue already in the Hindu Kush region, but this is something that Jakob knows better than we do. In the Andes, the situation is a bit different, I would say, because there we have really large towns all across the mountain region perimeter here, though there are some small towns that are not really adjacent here, but it's a bit a different situation. But I think the methodology in principle could make sense to say, well, we have these default cities and towns, and in the very in those regions with a low density, we have smaller towns that come into play in order to provide a good level of services and quality of life. So I think against the background of these maps, it's certainly worth to discuss, at least, not to immediately apply, but to discuss the four postulates that we discussed for the Alpine region in the recent in the last hours. And so key roles beyond size, small places matter. I think this is a line of thought that might be applicable here. The connection between urban and rural territories is certainly an issue for the Himalayan region, and at least for parts of the Andes region. The wording of front runners seems not very adequate, I would say, for all mountain regions, but at least the fact that climate change hits mountain regions in an earlier, maybe more intensive way, that certainly applies also to other mountain regions here, and underlines a certain role of the mountain towns, if you want. And well, networking hubs, this is something I cannot really judge. I'm not an expert neither for the Himalayan regions nor for the Andes region, but that cooperation in these specific territories plays a role. I think this is quite obvious. So I would say you can, of course, not apply the perspective of the report on the state of the Alps, the ninth one, directly on other mountain regions, but I think some lines of thoughts might be important to follow. And this is my last point. I would say what we might have underestimated is the relevance of settlement systems for spatial development and sustainable development in general. In our team, we now make a quantitative literature analysis really globally, what kind of topics are discussed with regard to mountain regions, and you have endless series on climate change, for good reasons, I would say. But if you if you have a look at literature on settlement systems in mountain regions, it becomes very, very narrow. Some rather technical issues there and some case studies, but I think the issue as such is underestimated. So all I want to say that it's worth to put the topic of settlement systems in mountain regions on the agenda of both policies and academia, even if we not can apply directly the methodology that we developed here in the Alps. Thank you.
Yeah, Tobias, thank you for this insight. And if you can stay with me for a few seconds, we take the time to ask a few questions on this matter, and also then to Jakob from the region. So yeah, Tobias, I mean, we talked about it globally. Mountains are considered rather rural, but also the picture here is quite different. Yeah, I think the Andes region in particular is very, very impressive. So what question does this raise in terms of sustainable development in mountain areas? Because yeah, as we discussed, usually climate change is, for example, one of the examples, but the settlement system, especially of this size, is not taken into account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, if the question is what can settlement systems contribute to sustainable development, I would say that the first aspect is an efficient or effective spatial development. So the balance between covering a large space and having effective centralized functions there. I think this is a principle that applies to all territories, and this is a specific challenge in mountain areas here. And I think to provide a quality of life in such a large space, this is the objective for all the regions. So I think this is why I think it's worth to go more into detail here.
And in terms of role for either positive or negative effects or challenges that are yet to come, what do you think would be important to look at in connection to mountain towns?
I would say that it's rather a cross-cutting perspective that we have to implement here. So it's really asking the question, what role can settlement systems play with regard to effective transport systems, with regard to effective water management issues, with regard to effective housing provision, education, essential services, and so on. So I would not really say there's one sector where we have to focus on, but it's really, for me, it's a cross-cutting issue. If this is an answer.
Yeah, so really this key to sustainable development, as we put it in a subtitle of the report. Mm-hmm. But maybe question to Jakob in the field. What are the biggest challenges, like from your experiments concerning small towns in the Himalayas that you are facing?
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much, Tobias, for the invitation to talk here today. There are many challenges, of course, and I think, seeing these reports about the Alps, this is super exciting. I wish we could do this for the region here. One reason why we can't do this yet is that we lack comprehensive data sets, right? So it's possible for us to map. To show the maps that you've shown just now, also for high mountain Asia, for the region, but we have very little understanding of who the people are who live in these towns, right? Where they move. The issue of connectivity, for example, is a big one. And now I was going to say, for those of you who experience the technical difficulties now during this Zoom conference, if you think this is bad, this is my daily bread and butter, right? I have regular meetings with people in the region, in different towns, from Afghanistan to Bhutan, and they constantly get kicked out of meetings. So that's that virtual connectivity. But then there's also, of course, the connectivity, the real connectivity via infrastructure and roads. There where very little understanding of what is actually, what is the infrastructure, how are those towns, how are they even linked by what quality of roads, but then how often do people move between those? to give you a bit of context to the Alps, I really like those maps that you showed. To how many hours does it take you to move around from an urban area, and how does that match with the type of urban, semi-urban, and then rural. In exactly 12 hours from now, I'm going to leave to an expedition to further up than 5,000 meters in the Himalaya, into an area where there are no more Alpine towns, but we are going to cross a couple of towns that have a couple of thousand inhabitants, right? And this is along a road so the end of the trip will basically be the equivalent to, let's say, Courmayeur or Airolo or Vipeteno in Italy, because it's one of the 3 connecting roads between China and the south of South Asia. And we're going to travel for just 140 kilometers, but it's going to take us, if you're lucky, 9 hours. But this I know because I travel a lot in this area. This is anecdotal evidence. We don't have we don't have these kind of data sets to do an analysis on a larger scale. But it's possible. There is technology around, and I think there is the motivation that we have seen in this conference today as well to look into this further. And there is a lot of interest from stakeholders in the region here to have a look at this, because they realize, of course, climate change is a big topic, and everything that's been discussed right now in parallel at COP27, right? This is all of great concern, but they also realize that the socio-economic drivers and the changes that are happening on the demand side, that they actually play, if not a bigger, at least an equal role to all the drivers that are coming from the changing climate. And we need to invest a lot more in collecting data on those systems to be able to come up with solutions. Because the one message that I would like to drive home, we have to challenge that conventional wisdoms that mountains are rural areas, just the same way in the Alps. It is the same. It's just as true here in the Hindu Kush Himalaya. Because so for me as an engineer, we try to find solutions, but if we have an imagination of a rural environment, we provide solutions for a rural environment. And if that environment is urban or semi-urban, then we're going to provide the wrong solutions, and then we have a big problem when it comes to adaptation.
Yeah, we heard that's quite a challenge also already in terms of knowing about these spaces in terms of different indicators. Let's say once you would know, as you said, it's a technical issue that can be overcome, but it takes a lot of effort. How would you deal with challenges, or how do you collaborate in regional or even international level on towns maybe?
I think the most important point, which is also something that we learned a lot in the last couple of years, is to not only talk to the national, to the federal level in the capitals, but to learn. Well, we do know the government structures in the different countries, right? But that we comprehend what those government structures mean down to the municipality, and that we include them in these discussions. And that, for example, when we have regional interactions between countries, we do this often at the higher ministerial level, which makes a lot of sense, right? So ministers from different countries would meet. But we also do a lot more interactions between, say, government staff at municipal level from one country, exchanging with people, with government staff from that municipal level, from that governance level, with other countries, because they have a very, very different experience on what it means also to live in a town, right? To live in a Himalayan town or in an Alpine town. And often the government stakeholders who live in the capital, which are well, we're close to the mountains. I can see the Himalaya from here if the air quality is good enough, but it's of course a different environment. People who sit in the capitals, they have a very different experience on adaptation and governance. So the biggest, I think the most important part is that the exchanges that we have on a regional level happen with governance structures from the town level between those different countries to also learn. Because they also do realize that a lot of the challenges are transboundary. Sometimes they are transboundary between two towns that are on the border between China and Nepal, for example. And it's much more useful if we then talk to those politicians who are actually in charge of those towns rather than the politicians who are in charge of the whole country.
So even though it's quite a different region in terms of size and governance and many, many other topics, I take it there's specific need for the urban in mountain policies or for the urban parts, and that also here, as within the Alps, it's very important that you talk to different levels of governance or different geographical scales, since it might not be the same what is needed from the transnational level than it is from the town or local level. So that's also found it very interesting to hear that. That's important to talk to both, because there's different adaptation strategies to the local context. Maybe Tobias, what topics would you like to further examine when you see this? As Jakob said, there's much still to do. What would be your number one priority?
Yeah, as you say, it's just the beginning, and just having kind of comparative data sets that would already be fascinating. I mean, in Europe we have statistical offices, we have Eurostat, and on other continents it's a different situation. And I really liked, Jakob, you sent an email a couple of days ago with a photograph taken from a bus, and the text was more or less, look, there's a city I didn't know before. So this really shows the differences between the data situation. So I think anything you do in research is a good step now, because it's really a bit an empty page in a way. So the first step would really be to provide a data set that is more or less comparable. It has not to be accurate 100%, but knowing what kind of settlement system is there in place on this transnational level. From a comparative perspective, that would be interesting. Then for me, it would be interesting to compare certain kinds of territories, like corridor development, like very peripheral towns, like these hubs or fringes between the more urbanized and more peripheral areas. So how are they organized? Is there something to learn from one region to another? Is there something like best practice or typical? So but the categorization of the spatial functioning. So that would be my second step then. And in any case, it would be certainly makes sense to compare case studies from different mountain regions here.
So yes, there's a lot still to do for Tobias and Jakob and ourselves. Thank you very, very much, Jakob, that you joined us from this space far away. It was really interesting, I think, also to hear from you, like a couple of points on mountain towns in a completely different mountain area. Thank you for joining, and also thank you, Tobias, for not only joining but also preparing together with Jakob and the others from ICIMOD this short paper. So thank you to ICIMOD.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to further exchange, because I think that's not just an academic level. You know, I'm interested as a researcher, but there is a lot of interest from stakeholders to look at this further. So it's worth it to stick to it and to keep investigating those issues more in depth in near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jakob.
Thanks, Jakob.
Bye.